Man Up, a program dedicated to inspiring and helping men live lives of heroic virtue. And now, it's time to man up.
Welcome to Man Up on Iowa Catholic Radio. We are broadcasting on the Iowa Catholic Radio Network. Today I am joined by a professor of philosophy at St. Thomas University, Dr. Mike Rota, and we are going to discuss the virtue of fortitude. Let's start in prayer in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle, be our protection against the wickedness and the snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray, and do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, cast into hell Satan and all the evil spirits who prowl about the world seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Continuing our series on the virtues. Started with the overview, and the prudence, and the justice. Now we are in the temperance and now fortitude. And so we're talking about these virtues and how they work together, right? They're so interconnected. Fortitude, I can't say I have a favorite one because they're all so important. Fortitude is one that I feel like I see it on a regular basis. You know, it feels like it's every day I need to work on increasing my fortitude. And I know that when I don't have it, when I'm lackadaisical in the faith, or as a husband, or as a father, that it's a lack of fortitude in my persevering to do well, to do good, to strive for those things that I'm supposed to be striving for, whether it's at work, whether it's in my faith, whether it's in my home. And so fortitude, I just feel it every single day. So really excited to have Dr. Mike Rota on the other side of the break to dive into the virtue of fortitude.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio comes from Mercy One, your expert circle of personalized care for all your health needs. With more care locations than anyone, your best life is their one purpose. Find your doctor at mercy1.org. Support for Iowa Catholic Radio is provided by Bell Construction. Bell Construction is a full-service residential and commercial roofing contractor in the Des Moines area since 1988. Bell Construction, 515-963-4494. Thank you, Bell Construction, for supporting Iowa Catholic Radio.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio comes from Riebe of Ames, home of Warranty Forever, offering new, used, and commercial vehicles as well as service and Mopar parts. Riebe of Ames is located just off of Highway 30 at the Dayton Avenue exit and online at DerryAmes.com.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio comes from John Leonetti, EOS Implementer, the entrepreneurial operating system, helping businesses and organizations clarify, simplify, and achieve their vision. John.Leonetti at EOSworldwide.com.
My help comes from you. You're right here.
Welcome back to Man Up on Iowa Catholic Radio. Excited today to be joined by Mike Rota. He is a professor of philosophy at St. Thomas University in St. Paul, Minnesota. He was educated at Stanford University, Franciscan University of Steubenville, St. Louis University, where he got his PhD, and did a postdoctorate fellowship at Harvard. He brings together the ancient wisdom and cutting-edge academic research to explore the big questions in philosophy and theology. He's the author of Taking Pascal's Wager, and today he joins me to discuss the virtue of fortitude. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So I told you we're going through all of the virtues, and so we've done the kind of introductory level, overview of all of them, and now we've into prudence, and now we're justice. Now we're jumping into fortitude. And so as we go through this journey, really, what I want to do is to help our listeners understand where these virtues came from. You know, where in time were they conceived of, and how did the Catholic Church, the Christian churches in general, take these virtues and make them into what we call supernatural virtues, what we would consider into the spiritual life, the virtues that we should be applying to our daily lives. So can you help us understand maybe the history of the virtue of fortitude?
Sure. So the four cardinal virtues are actually mentioned in the Old Testament. I can't remember if it's in the Deuterocanonical works, which is that little bit of the Bible that would have been in St. Paul's Greek Old Testament, but which Protestants don't recognize, or whether it's in another part of the Old Testament. But they get mentioned there, and they also get mentioned in Plato. And then Aristotle says a lot more about them. So maybe I could talk briefly about what Aristotle says about fortitude or courage, and then tell you a little bit about what St. Thomas Aquinas says about it.
Ball's in your court. That sounds great to me.
Okay, so before going into Aristotle, let's set the stage here to see what fortitude is about. I want to talk about a recent movie, which is really a movie about courage. Have you seen the movie Dunkirk?
So let's say this: the fact that I know there's a movie called Dunkirk and roughly what it's about is a win for you. That's as good as you're going to get from me in movies.
Okay, you should see it, Joe. It's
I've heard
really
it's great.
Terrific.
I've heard it's great.
So there's a contrast between characters and how they handle fear in that movie. So early on, the movie's about the evacuation of British soldiers from the Dunkirk beach in France near the beginning of World War II. And early in the movie, there's a boat with soldiers trying to leave the beach. It gets destroyed, and a bunch of soldiers end up floating in the water. They're alive, but they're sort of stranded, and it's at night. And there's a scene where an officer is in a small rescue boat, and he picks up some of those who are adrift. But when his boat gets full, and there's lots of other soldiers in the water, and they're calling, pick us up, pick us up. And he's super calm, and he says, hey, guys, the water's not cold. You've got your life preservers. Somebody will be here to pick you up. Calm down. And you think, wow, brave guy. Turns out not. Turns out his attitude is much different when the danger is to him. So later in the show, he's evacuated on a ship. He gets torpedoed. He ends up floating on some wreckage. And he gets saved. He gets saved by one of the civilian boats that's coming from England to France to pick up soldiers. So he gets pulled onto this boat. But then when he finds out that they're going towards the fight, not away from it, they're actually going to Dunkirk, he just loses it. And he tries to fight the pilot of the vessel. He ends up fatally injuring a teenage boy who's on the crew. So his courage, it disappears when it's about danger to him. And then meanwhile, you have another character who's Tom Hardy's character. He's a fighter pilot. He has a choice at a certain point. He's running out of gas. And he has to choose fly home, which would be the normal thing to do as part of his mission. He's already shot down a few planes. Fly home or stay and save more soldiers there by engaging the enemy fighter planes, but he's going to run out of gas, and he's not going to be home. So he chooses to stay. And in this dramatic scene, he shoots down a final German plane, and he runs out of gas. So his plane is now silent, and he's just gliding down to land on the beach. And the director of the film cuts all the sound. So for the viewer, you're just watching this plane glide in silence, and it's quiet. And what that's doing is evoking the calm in the pilot's soul. So the shell-shocked soldier back on the boat who fatally injured that other person, he was loud, he's chaotic in his actions because he's in the grip of fear. Whereas the pilot's composed, he's conquered fear, and that lets him undertake noble action. So that's what Fortitude's about. It's about responding well to fear.
As you say that, a movie I actually have seen is Hacksaw Ridge. And again, I mean, these war movies and oftentimes will invoke a lot of these virtues. And I think to your point, it's a great way to get you're showing a very good comparison of one versus the other. When you're saying that, when I think of Fortitude, Hacksaw Ridge comes to mind with Desmond Doss and his going in the face of fear, understanding what was at stake, but doing the noble thing. Can you? So as we look at the word fortitude, I'm going to get off a little bit off subject here. Can you kind of break down what it means specifically? Yeah.
So fortis in Latin is just the word for brave, bravery or courage, and so fortitude is a habit of having courage. And that's how Aristotle introduces it. So for Aristotle, virtues are habits. Now, a habit, what's that? It's a stable tendency to act or react in a certain way in a given sort of situation. In the case of courage, the situation is things involving fear, things that provoke fear. So to possess the virtue of courage for Aristotle is to have a stable tendency to act and react well in situations that provoke fear or involve danger. If you have a tendency or habit of feeling too much fear, more than is warranted, given the situation, or if you have a habit of running away from problems that make you afraid, then Aristotle says, okay, that's the habit of cowardice, the vice of cowardice. On the other hand, there are people who feel too little fear, because it's rational. There are some things we should be afraid of. And it's possible to rush headlong into danger without sufficient thought. So that would be the habit of rashness. And then getting the balance right that's the virtue of fortitude, where you have a stable tendency to feel an appropriate amount of fear given the threat in question.
So we've got, As I say, you've got two extremes then: cowardice on one side, and maybe foolhardiness on the other.
Right.
And in the middle is this virtue of fortitude, but it has to be, I assume, balanced by prudence. Is that where? What is the what is the balancing thing to understand where that fits?
Good. Okay. So if we say fortitude is about having an appropriate amount of fear and responding to it well, that raises the question, well, what counts as an appropriate amount of fear? And here we can't say in a mathematical way what that will be. We all recognize that there's going to be such a thing as an appropriate fear. If, you should be afraid of a tiger and not of a frog. But what exactly, what is the range of an appropriate fear? That will depend on the situation, the personality of the person. And as later philosophers think about it, they say you can't really write down rules for this, but if you have the virtue of prudence, that's the virtue of knowing in general, what the right thing to do is, and in particular what the right thing to do is. So with the virtue of prudence, I guess you'd have a better idea about what's an appropriate amount of fear.
Yeah. And you keep talking. So here's where my head's going. Before we're eventually going to get into maybe Cicero or Aquinas and whatnot. But you keep talking about it being in regards to fear. And so my head has this idea of fortitude could be, I could do fortitude in my work, just making sure I'm getting my work done and persevering through, whether it's reading a book that's difficult to read or doing a project. Does fortitude play into that too then, or am I missing that?
No, you're right. So it's like this. When Aristotle talks about fortitude, he focuses on the case of fear of death in battle. Like that's his central case of courage.
Okay.
And when Aquinas, many centuries later, talks about fortitude or courage, he says, we can consider this term fortitude in sort of a general or in a very specific sense. In a very specific sense, it's what Aristotle's talking about, handling fear of death in battle. But it's also in a much broader sense. It relates to how we handle fear of any difficult thing. And that's the sort of fortitude which would apply to our everyday lives. And as you say, work, let's say you've got some task at work, some particular project, it's going to be difficult. It's going to take a lot of original thought, or you're going to have to talk to all these people you don't want to talk to, or there's some aspect of it that's difficult for you and you keep putting it off. There, the virtue of fortitude, a habit of being able to say, I know this is difficult, but it needs to get done, so I'm going to set aside my fear and do it. Their fortitude would be relevant.
So Aquinas does obviously then expand upon what Aristotle had laid out. How else does he add to the foundation laid by Aristotle? Okay,
so he says a lot.
Yeah, he tends to do that. He tends to say a lot.
The first cool thing he does is he gives us a way to conceive of fortitude. It's very helpful because it helps you see how it applies to so much in your life. So we have to talk about intellect, will, and the emotions to do this. So let me say a few words about that. Aquinas, when he's thinking about human beings and their abilities, he distinguishes between your intellect, your will, and then the part of you which enables you to feel emotions, which he calls the sensitive appetite. Not a word we use much today. The intellect, that's the part of you which enables you to engage in conceptual thinking. Your will is the part of you which enables you to make choices. Your sensitive appetite, that allows you to feel emotions. And Aquinas notices two very general features of the moral life. He says, sometimes our emotions say to us, do it. And our mind says, no, that's not a good idea. So my emotions say to me, have the third beer or have the second piece of cake or hit that guy in the face. And with my mind, with my intellect, I say, that's not a good idea. If you have the stable tendency of listening to reason or to your intellect rather than emotion in that situation, that's the virtue of temperance. So the virtue of temperance is about not listening to reason when it would push you into doing something that's not wise. Okay. The virtue of fortitude is the flip side. That's where your emotions say, don't do it. And your reason says, you kind of need to do this.
Yeah, good.
So your fear says, don't start that paper. That's going to be difficult. Your reason says, you need to do this. It's due tomorrow. Your fear says, don't bring up that difficult issue with your spouse. But within your mind, we need to talk about this. Your fear says, don't look at the lab results of that, cancer test you just had. Your reason says, you probably want this information. So if you have a stable tendency of listening to reason when emotion would hold you back from doing what is clearly the wise thing, then that's the virtue of fortitude.
Okay, it goes back to prudence then, too. I mean, to some extent, that's what is guiding the decision on temperance versus fortitude, and that kind of overarching virtue of prudence that is kind of guiding all of these cardinal virtues.
Absolutely. Yeah, and the virtues are so connected. So, like, justice is about giving to others what we owe them. Like I owe it to someone to treat them with respect and love, and not to stab them, and, to gossip behind their back or something. Take the virtue of justice. When push comes to shove, you're not going to exercise the virtue of justice unless you have some courage, because there will be times when doing the right thing will lead you into difficulty, which you fear. So you need fortitude to be just. And as you've been pointing out, you need prudence to even figure out what the right thing to do is. So you can figure out, what's reason telling me. So they're all connected.
Well, now that we got kind of a framework of what the fortitude is, can you help us understand maybe some scenarios, real life, and how we can build fortitude in the natural, maybe in the supernatural world as we're facing it and we're trying to become more virtuous people?
I can try. Let's talk about some examples. So we've talked about fear of work a bit. I see it with my students, and when they have to just write a paper, for example, or do a large homework assignment. So procrastination is common. I think it's even more common now after COVID. I'm not sure. I don't know if the high school experience of students during COVID was not helpful or whatever, but I'm seeing a lot of procrastination among more students than I used to.
But not the Des Moines seminarians, though. These are other students.
Oh, no, the seminarians are great. Yeah,
not our seminary. Okay, good. Just want to make sure.
So what's going on there? It's the fear of effort, I think. Or maybe it could be more complicated, the fear of failure or something, the fear of not doing well, the fear of trying hard, then failing anyway and feeling even worse. I don't know. But more commonly, it's just going to be the fear of effort. So my advice to a student who was in that situation would be, you need to arrange the whole circumstance so it's going to assist you and not hurt you. Boy, if you've got a cell phone in your pocket and you're in the habit of procrastinating, that's not helpful to always have something else to do. So what do? Maybe you find a friend, both of you realize you need to get some work done, and you turn off your phones and you go to a quiet part of the library where you're not going to be tempted to talk, and you work on stuff in a place where it's going to be hard to go get distracted. At work, when I have a difficult project that I'm putting myself off, and that happens, sometimes I tell myself, okay, just work on it an hour and work on it first work task I can in the morning. It turns out there's empirical evidence for the idea that we have a little more willpower in the beginning of the day, and it gets a little bit depleted the more we exercise it by the end of the day. So it's like a muscle. So I like to take an hour at the beginning of the day and do that difficult task. And sometimes I'll end up working 3 hours will go by. I'll get a ton done. I'll look back and I'll say, it wasn't so bad. And sometimes I'll just do my hour and be like, okay, done with that. Another topic. How about fear of disapproval by others? So we're social beings, and there's fear comes up all the time in our social relationships. So you might have just fear to talk to a new person, or fear to kind of let yourself be known in a relationship because you're afraid of being rejected. Fear of conflict. So in close personal relationships, a fear of conflict can prevent us from bringing issues into the open where we could productively discuss them. I know a man who more or less enabled his wife's alcoholism for decades, and I think he was just afraid of the conflict that would come. He tried to get between her and her addiction. They're afraid of the damage to the relationship. But sometimes we have a duty to share a challenging word out of love. It's hard to do. We need fortitude to do that.
So
that's close personal relationship. Yeah.
I would say the other ones I look at is when we're in this. Now I'm going to kind of move it to the supernatural world.
Sure.
When we're trying to, and this is just my own thought, in the spiritual life, maybe persevering in times of dryness, whether in prayer, or making sure we get up and we do the prayer in the morning. You maybe not feel motivated to do prayer that morning. Maybe it's just doing it, right? Persevering in prayer, persevering in doing the corporal works of mercy, even though you might not feel like you want to do them. Getting your family to mass or doing the rosaries, these things that you might not feel inclined to do. The virtue of fortitude would say persevere in them and do them because it is the right thing to do.
Yes. Yeah. So, okay, good. Before we go back to other examples,
and we've got about 2 minutes left. So I want you to hit a home run here on the way out. I know time flies.
Okay. Let me tell you briefly, when Aquinas talks about fortitude, he talks about 4 important parts of it. Okay. And he makes an interesting distinction between attacking difficulty and enduring difficulty. He says, and these are all going to be parts of fortitude. So to attack difficulty, he says, requires 2 things. You got to prepare the mind, stirring up boldness and hope. So if there's some worthy, difficult undertaking, you got to kind of get yourself ready to do it and then actually carrying it out. Example, suppose you want to improve your marriage, but it's going to require you to change in ways you don't want to change. But you take initiative. So you sort of stir up hope that your marriage can be better with the help of your spouse, maybe others. You put together some ideas, a plan about how to change. It takes fortitude to even do that. Like, it's much easier to just ignore the problem. So that's one part of fortitude. Another part then is actually carrying out the plan. Then when Aquinas talks about enduring difficulty, he makes a distinction between patience and perseverance. So he says to endure difficulty, it requires, here's a direct quote from Aquinas, it requires that, quote, the mind not be broken by sadness because of the difficulty posed by present trials. And he names patience as the name for the virtue by which we endure difficult present trials. And then he says there's an additional difficulty when a trial lasts through time and you have to deal with it day after day. So that's the virtue of perseverance, which is part of fortitude. And that's the virtue that comes into play when you continue to struggle on and you don't give up despite prolonged difficulty.
Well, that's great. Hey, any further reading, about 30 seconds here. If someone wanted to do some further reading on the subject of fortitude, or maybe the virtues in general, is there a book or a resource you would point them to?
Oh, my gosh. There's a book. There's a book from 2006 on Aquinas on fortitude that brings him into discussion with contemporary psychologists, but I'm blanking on the name. So, sorry, Joe.
Google search it and we can figure it out. Okay. No, that's fair. Well, Dr. Rota, I appreciate you jumping on the show with me today. And again, to me, this is all the virtues are so important. Fortitude is just one of those ones that is so concrete in how we need it today. It feels like so many, C.S. Lewis talked about men without chest. Well, a lot of that has to do with fortitude, just a lack of willpower, a lack of stick-to-itiveness. And so it's definitely a virtue in need today. So thank you so much for joining me. We're going to head to a short break, and we'll be right back.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio provided by Mercy College of Health Sciences, where you can chart your course for more.
Mercy College provides unparalleled clinical rotations, hands-on learning, accelerated education, and flexible schedules. Since 1899, Mercy College has been transforming students into healthcare professionals. Guided by Catholic values, our faculty put classroom theory into practice. Students are prepared for roles in service and leadership throughout their own careers.
Learn more at mchs.edu. Mercy College of Health Sciences, mchs.edu.
I feel like we're lost in this woods. And why is my boyfriend up in a tree?
It doesn't matter. Who could be against choice?
Depends on the choice. And what did you do with our compass?
What about the rights of my conscience?
Does your conscience recognize the right thing to do?
Watch! I'm choosing to prune the branch off this tree.
But it's the one you're sitting on. Ah! Choice is a means, not an end. Form your conscience to make good choices. You'll be glad you did. Looks like I need to choose a different boyfriend.
Ouch!
A message from
Iowa
Catholic Radio.
My help comes from you. You're right here
Welcome back to Man Up on Iowa Catholic Radio. My thanks again to Dr. Mike Rota. A few things to mention there. We really had a lot more to cover, and there's so many more things to Fortitude that we could have extrapolated on. Maybe I'll do another episode on it, quite honestly. But a few things to tie it up. So first off, the idea of Fortitude, I'm obviously, if you've listened to the show, I'm a big Jocko Willink guy, and Jocko Willink talks about, how do you get out of bed in the morning? If you can't get out of bed to work out, right? He's like, well, the answer is you set an alarm, and when the alarm goes off, you get up and you do it. And then you do the things, and you do the hard things, and then you do a full day's work, and then by 9 o'clock that night, you're going to be tired, and then it's going to be easier to wake up. Well, maybe not be super easy, but eventually, after you train yourself to do these things by just doing them, by doing the hard thing, you'll build that virtue of fortitude. So you can see that. Obviously, that's in the natural world, and the supernatural world is the same way. And there's this idea of fearing the right thing within the virtue of fortitude. And so obviously Aristotle, we talked about death in battle. He was so that was like his highest level of virtue of fortitude. Well, actually the supernatural version of that is martyrdom. That's actually death in accordance with the right thing. So a person transformed by grace fears the right thing. So if you think of Maximilian Kolbe, he's in the concentration camp, and he feared not death. He feared not doing the right thing. He knew what the right thing to do was. And so he was much more concerned with the higher things, the things of God. And so you see this in the martyrs, right? So in Jesus Christ, we see all the virtues perfectly, right? So prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. He has them personified perfectly. Obviously, in the virtue of fortitude, in the fortitude of the cross, of dying for the innocent, or dying for the guilty, the innocent one dying for the guilty. The idea of laying one's life down in being transformed by grace and putting yourself in this position where you are a martyr for the faith, that is the highest level of fortitude. And so what are we doing in our lives? It might not be a red martyrdom, but we're all called to these white martyrdoms every day. And that is accomplished through grace and the virtue of fortitude. So much to talk about. Again, I knew I was going to do a series on this eventually. Obviously, I've been procrastinating, as Dr. Mike said. It's finally here, and you can see why I'm so jazzed up about it. The more we study the virtues, the more we train for them in our lives, the better people will be, the better husbands will be, the better fathers will be, the better Christians we will be, the more we can then change the world. So thank you today for joining me on Man Up on Iowa Catholic Radio. I am Joe Stopulos. It's time to man up.
Man Up, inspiring men to live out their call to holiness.